What happens when a man secure in his wealth and arrogance decides to treat his mistress to a weekend of luxury at the city's most exclusive 5-star hotel? He books the best suite orders, the finest champagne, and openly mocks the quiet, unassuming wife he left at home. He believes he holds all the power, that his wife is nothing more than a decoration in the life he built. But he's about to learn a devastating lesson. While he was busy building an affair, his wife was busy building an empire. In the next few minutes, you'll witness the most spectacular, satisfying corporate takedown you've ever heard, when the cheated wife doesn't just walk in on her husband, she walks in as his new boss. Julian Sterling considered himself the king of his universe. His kingdom was a sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue, his chariot a gleaming black Rolls-Royce, and his subjects were the legions of employees at his private equity firm, Sterling Capital. He had forged his empire through ruthless ambition and what he called unshakable vision. In reality, it was old money leveraged with a predator's instinct for weakness. His wife, Amelia Sterling, was in his eyes the most beautiful and most useless of all his acquisitions. He had married her 10 years ago. She was the daughter of a small independent hotelier, a man Julian had openly disdained as a sentimental fool who cared more for guest satisfaction than profit margins. But Amelia was lovely, graceful, and possessed a quiet dignity that Julian mistook for docility. She was the perfect accessory for his galas, a serene presence in their cold, minimalist home, and a woman who never ever challenged him. He clothed her in Chanel, adorned her with Cartier, and in return he expected her to be silent, beautiful, and absent from his real life, the life of power deals and indiscretion. Lately that indiscretion had a name, Chloe Vance. Chloe was everything Amelia was not. She was a fiery, ambitious marketing associate from a rival firm with a razor-sharp tongue and a voracious appetite for the lifestyle Julian could provide. She was loud where Amelia was quiet, demanding where Amelia was accommodating. To Julian, she was a thrill, a validation of his power. He felt alive with her, not like the bored monarch he felt with his wife. The plan for the weekend was perfect in its audacity. He had told Amelia he was flying to Chicago for an urgent merger negotiation. "It's a killer deal, darling," he'd said, straightening his Tom Ford tie in the hall mirror, not even glancing at her. "I'll be locked in a boardroom all weekend. Don't wait up." Amelia simply nodded, her expression placid as she handed him his briefcase. "Be safe, Julian." He pecked her on the cheek, a gesture as sterile as a corporate handshake. He didn't notice the flicker of something in her eyes, a deep, unreadable current beneath a calm surface. He didn't notice because he had never bothered to look. An hour later, Julian wasn't at the airport. He was picking up Chloe from her downtown apartment. She slid into the passenger seat of his Aston Martin, a flash of red lipstick and expensive perfume. "Is everything set, baby?" she purred, running a manicured hand along his arm. "Only the best for you," Julian smirked. "I've booked the presidential suite at the Grand Elysian. Champagne on ice, private dinner, the works." The Grand Elysian was the crown jewel of New York's luxury hotels. It was an institution, a bastion of old-world elegance and modern opulence. It was also notoriously difficult to get a reservation for a top suite on short notice. "How did you manage that?" Chloe asked, impressed. "I heard it's booked solid for months." Julian laughed, a rich, arrogant sound. "Money doesn't just talk, my dear. It screams. Besides, I know people. A few calls a reminder of how much business my firm directs their way. They were more than happy to accommodate a valued client." He felt a surge of pride. This was what he did. He bent the world to his will. They arrived at the hotel, pulling into the private valet entrance. The doorman, resplendent in his uniform, greeted him by name. "Welcome back, Mr. Sterling." Inside the lobby was a masterpiece of marble gold leaf and colossal fresh flower arrangements. The quiet hum of wealth was palpable. Julian, with Chloe, tucked possessively under his arm, strode to the front desk. The manager, a polished man named Mr. Abernathy, rushed out from his office to greet them personally. "Mr. Sterling, a pleasure. The presidential suite is ready for you. We trust everything will be to your satisfaction." "I'm sure it will be Robert," Julian said, using the manager's first name with practiced familiarity. He signed the check-in form with a flourish. As he did, he glanced at the hotel's logo, embossed on the top of the page, a golden E intertwined with a laurel wreath. The Elysian Hotel Group, a global symbol of 5-star luxury. Up in the suite, Chloe gasped. It was larger than her entire apartment, with panoramic views of Central Park, a grand piano in one corner, and a bottle of Dom Perignon chilling in a silver bucket. "Julian, it's breathtaking," she whispered, spinning around. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, nuzzling her neck. "This is where you belong, Chloe. Not with some 9-to-5 loser. With me. In a world without limits." "And what about her?" Chloe asked the question, a familiar refrain. Julian's face tightened for a second. "Amelia. What about her? She's at home, probably arranging flowers or reading a book. She lives in her own little world. She has no idea how my world, the real world, even works." He poured 2 glasses of champagne. "Tonight and this weekend, she doesn't exist. It's just you and me." He handed her a glass, and they toasted. The crystal glasses chimed a delicate sound in the opulent room. Julian felt invincible. He had his brilliant career, his beautiful mistress, and a weekend of hedonism ahead of him. His quiet, compliant wife was miles away, blissfully ignorant in their gilded cage. He was the king, and the king could do no wrong. Down below, the city lights began to twinkle, and Julian Sterling believed with every fibre of his being that he was on top of the world. He had no idea he was standing on a precipice, and the ground was about to give way. While Julian and Chloe were losing themselves in the luxurious bubble of the presidential suite, another scene was unfolding 40 floors below in the hotel's executive wing. This part of the Grand Elysian was not for guests. It was a silent, carpeted world of polished mahogany and hushed, serious conversations, the nerve center of the entire Elysian Hotel Group's North American operations. In the main boardroom, a long table was surrounded by a dozen sober-faced executives. These were the vice presidents, the regional directors, the heads of finance and operations. They were the generals of a corporate empire, and they were all waiting. There was a nervous tension in the air. For weeks, rumors had been swirling. The company's patriarch and chairman, Marcus Thorne, had passed away unexpectedly, and the transition of power had been shrouded in secrecy. Thorne was a legend, a self-made titan who had built the Elysian brand from a single boutique hotel into a global behemoth. His passing had left a massive power vacuum. At the head of the table sat a distinguished silver-haired man named Arthur Davies. He was the lead counsel for the Elysian Group and had been Marcus Thorne's closest friend and confidant for over 50 years. He held a single leather-bound folder, and his face was impassive. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice." Arthur began, his voice calm but commanding. "As you know, Marcus Thorne's passing was a great loss to us all. His leadership was singular. However, he was a meticulous planner, and his succession plan is, and always has been, firmly in place." A murmur went through the room. Most of them expected Marcus's son, a notorious playboy with little interest in the business, to be named a figurehead chairman, while the board ran things behind the scenes. "Before we proceed," Arthur continued, "I want to address the purpose of this emergency meeting. It is not just to inform you of the transition. It is to introduce you to the new majority shareholder and chairwoman of the board of the Elysian Hotel Group, effective immediately." This sent a shockwave through the room. Majority shareholder chairwoman. The stock was thought to be divided among various trusts and institutional investors. No one knew of a single majority owner. Upstairs, blissfully unaware, Julian was recounting a story for Chloe's benefit. So I told him, the deal is the deal. You either have the stomach for it, or you don't. The man practically wept. He laughed, topping off her champagne. "You have to be ruthless in this business, Chloe. No room for sentiment." And Amelia. Chloe prompted, enjoying the way he denigrated his wife. It made her feel superior. "Sentiment is all she knows," Julian scoffed. Her father God, rest his soul, was the same. He owned one little hotel in the countryside. He knew all his guests by name. Can you imagine he called it hospitality? I call it a pathetic business model. He died with nothing but good memories. I plan to die with a legacy. He gestured around the suite. This is legacy, power, the things that matter. He had no idea that the pathetic hotelier he was mocking Amelia's father, Robert Langdon, was the very man whose ghost was presiding over the meeting downstairs. In the boardroom, Arthur Davies opened the folder. Marcus Thorne was a brilliant businessman, but he was not the founder of the Elysian Group. He was a co-founder. His partner was a silent one, a man who preferred to stay in the shadows and focus on a single perfect property as his laboratory for the ideals that would define this brand. A man who provided the foundational philosophy of service that Marcus turned into a global strategy. That man's name was Robert Langdon. A few of the older executives shifted uncomfortably. They remembered the name a whisper from the company's early days. Robert and Marcus had an agreement, Arthur explained. Marcus would be the face, the builder. Robert would be the soul, the silent guardian of their shared vision. In exchange for his anonymity, Robert retained a 51% controlling stake in the parent company, a stake which upon his death 2 years ago passed to his sole heir, his daughter. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop on the thick wool carpet. For the past 2 years, Arthur said, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, she has honored her father's wish to observe, to learn the business from the inside out, to understand the legacy she was inheriting before taking her rightful place at its head. She has sat in on finance calls, under an alias, reviewed every operational report, and worked with me to prepare for this day. She felt it was now the right time to step out of the shadows. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce you to your new chairwoman. The doors to the boardroom opened, and Amelia Sterling walked in. She was not the woman Julian left at home. The soft pastel cardigans were gone, replaced by a tailored dark navy suit that bespoke quiet authority. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, professional chignon. Her face, free of the placid, accommodating expression she wore for Julian, was composed, intelligent, and serious. The only hint of her old life was the simple gold locket she wore, a gift from her father. She walked to the head of the table and stood beside Arthur Davies, her posture perfect, her gaze sweeping over the powerful executives who were now technically her subordinates. There was no fear in her eyes, only resolve. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of the soft gentleness Julian was used to. "My name is Amelia Langdon Sterling. My father, Robert Langdon, believed that true luxury wasn't about gold taps and chandeliers. It was about dignity, the dignity of our guests, and the dignity of our staff. For 2 years I have watched this company. I have seen where we honor that vision, and I have seen where we have allowed profit margins to erode our soul. That is going to change. We are going to return to the core principles my father built this company on. Our work begins today. One by one, the stunned executives rose to their feet, their applause starting hesitantly, and then growing into a thunderous ovation of respect and surprise. The Queen had not been in the gilded cage. She had been in the war room preparing for her coronation. Upstairs, Julian's phone buzzed. It was a text from one of his contacts on the Elysian board, a man he played golf with. He glanced at it, frowning. The message read, "Julian, you will not believe what just happened. You need to get down to the boardroom. Now." Julian scoffed, showing the phone to Chloe. "More corporate drama. Someone probably got fired. Let them sort it out." He put his phone on silent and turned his attention back to his mistress. He was king of his castle, and he would not be disturbed. The Do Not Disturb sign hung on the handle of the presidential suite, a useless ward against the storm that was gathering. Inside, Julian and Chloe had ordered room service, an extravagant affair of lobster and steak, which they ate while laughing about the trivialities of their respective offices. For Julian, this weekend was a perfect escape, a hermetically sealed world of pleasure, where the rules of his other life didn't apply. His phone, though on silent, had been vibrating incessantly on the nightstand. He ignored it. It was probably his COO, panicking about some minor detail in the Chicago deal, the deal that didn't exist. He felt a smug satisfaction at his own cleverness. Downstairs, Amelia's first board meeting was a masterclass in quiet efficiency. She didn't make grand, sweeping pronouncements. Instead, she asked precise, insightful questions that revealed an encyclopedic knowledge of the company's financials and operations. She spoke of occupancy rates in the Tokyo branch, guest satisfaction scores in the London flagship, and staffing issues in their new Dubai resort. The executives who had initially been skeptical of this unknown heiress were now looking at her with a mixture of awe and intimidation. This was no trophy wife. This was a leader. As the meeting wrapped up, Arthur Davies leaned over to her. "There is one more piece of business for today, Amelia, the Sterling capital proposal." Amelia's expression remained perfectly neutral. "Ah, yes. The proposal for them to manage a portion of our employee pension fund. Have they arrived?" "Mr. Sterling's associate, a Mr. Peterson, is waiting in the small conference room. Mr. Sterling himself was expected, but he hasn't responded to our calls. Apparently he's unreachable this weekend." Arthur delivered this last line with the faintest hint of irony. "I see," Amelia said, a cool calm settling over her. This was it, the moment she had both dreaded and meticulously planned for. "I'll handle this personally, Arthur. Please have Mr. Peterson brought to my new office. The chairman's office." The chairman's office at the Grand Elysian was a vast, wood-panelled room on the top executive floor, with a view that rivaled the presidential suites. It had been Marcus Thorne's for 30 years. As Amelia walked in, she ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of the massive mahogany desk. Her father had never wanted an office like this. But she knew that to command the respect of men like her husband, she had to inhabit the spaces they understood spaces of power. A few minutes later, Julian's junior partner, a nervous young man named David Peterson, was escorted in. He clutched his briefcase, clearly intimidated by the unexpected summons to the chairman's office and the presence of the new unknown chairwoman. "Ms. Sterling." He stammered, confused by the name. "I was expecting to meet with the finance committee." "There's been a change of plans, Mr. Peterson." Amelia said, her voice polite but firm. "Please have a seat. I'm reviewing the Sterling capital proposal myself. I believe you were supposed to be joined by your firm's CEO, my husband." David paled. He was called away on urgent business. In Chicago. He sends his deepest apologies. Chicago. Yes, I'm sure it's very urgent, Amelia said, her eyes boring into him. Tell me, Mr. Peterson, does your firm's proposal rely heavily on Mr. Sterling's personal assurances and his relationship with the Elysian group? Well, yes, of course. Julian's reputation is... His reputation is what we are here to discuss, Amelia interrupted smoothly. But before we get into the details of this pension fund, I have a more pressing matter. It's a guest relations issue. It seems we have a VIP guest staying in our presidential suite who has been making some irregular charges to his corporate account. An account which I believe is under your firm's name. She slid a printout across the desk. It was an itemized list from the hotel's billing system. Presidential suite guest name, Julian Sterling. Room service for 2. A bottle of Dom Perignon. A delivery from a high-end lingerie boutique. A booking for a couple's massage. David Peterson stared at the paper, his face turning ashen. He knew Julian was married to a woman named Amelia. The name on the door in front of him was Amelia Sterling. The pieces began to click into place with horrifying speed. Now, Amelia continued, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. Since Mr. Sterling is so difficult to reach in Chicago, I was hoping you could help me. We have a zero-tolerance policy for fraudulent use of corporate accounts, especially when one is pitching to manage our employees' retirement funds. It suggests a certain moral flexibility. So I'm going to have my head of security escort you upstairs. You are going to knock on that door, and you are going to inform Mr. Sterling that his new chairwoman would like a word, immediately. Upstairs, the Do Not Disturb sign was finally ignored. A firm, insistent knock echoed through the suite. Julian groaned, pulling a silk robe over his boxers. Who in God's name is that? He stomped to the door, ready to unleash his fury on whatever staff member had dared to bother him. He wrenched the door open and froze. Standing there was not a bellhop or a maid. It was David Peterson, his face pale with terror. Behind him stood 2 imposing men in sharp suits, hotel security. David, what the hell are you doing here? Julian demanded, his voice a low growl. Julian, you have to come with me, David stuttered. There's a meeting, downstairs, with the new chairwoman. Chairwoman, what are you talking about? I'm busy. Tell them to reschedule. Julian snapped, trying to close the door. One of the security men put a firm hand on the door, stopping it. Sir, the chairwoman insisted. She said to tell you it's a matter concerning Sterling Capital's contract. And your wife? Julian's blood ran cold. His wife. How could they know about Amelia? Did she have a car accident? Was she ill? 100 scenarios ran through his mind, none of them preparing him for the truth. Chloe appeared at his shoulder, wrapped in a sheet. Julian, darling, is everything all right? David Peterson's eyes widened in horror as he saw her. The whole sordid picture was now complete. Get dressed, Julian hissed at Chloe, his mind racing. Both of you, give me 5 minutes. He threw on the first suit. He could find his hands trembling slightly. This made no sense. He walked through the hushed executive corridors flanked by security, his bravado evaporating with every step. They led him to the chairman's office. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open and stepped inside. And there she was, his wife, Amelia. Standing behind the enormous desk, not as a visitor but as its occupant. She looked up from a file and her eyes met his. There was no pain, no tears, no shock. There was only the cool, appraising look of a superior assessing a subordinate. A deeply disappointing subordinate. The world tilted on its axis. The floor seemed to fall away from beneath Julian's feet. The king had just walked into the throne room, only to find his quiet, unassuming queen sitting on his throne. And she wasn't smiling. "Julian." Amelia said, her voice as crisp as a freshly printed stock certificate. "So glad you could finally join us. We have a great deal to discuss." The silence in the chairman's office was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Julian Sterling, a man who commanded boardrooms and terrified subordinates, with a single glare stood frozen in the middle of the room, his mind struggling to process the impossible reality before him. The woman he had dismissed as a decorative object was standing in the seat of ultimate power of a global corporation, looking at him not as a wife, but as a problem to be managed. "Amelia, what? What is this? Is this some kind of joke?" He finally managed the words catching in his throat. "I can assure you, Julian, my position on this board is no joke," she replied, her tone devoid of any emotion he recognized. She gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Please, sit." It was a command, not an invitation. He sank into the leather chair, his legs feeling weak. He looked at her truly. Looked at her for the first time in years. He saw the intelligence in her eyes. He had always ignored the strength in her posture he had never credited her with. The woman he thought he knew was a complete stranger. "How we?" was all he could ask. "My father," she said simply. "Robert Langdon. The sentimental fool you so often pitied. He was the co-founder and silent majority shareholder of this entire company. He left his 51% controlling stake to me. I've spent the last 2 years learning the business, preparing to take my place. Your tryst just happened to coincide with my first day." She delivered this information with the detached air of someone discussing last quarter's earnings report. The mention of her father, of the man he had openly mocked, was a physical blow. The foundation of his arrogance, that he was the brilliant one who had married down, crumbled into dust. "You knew," he whispered, the realization dawning. "You knew I was coming here. With her." I confess the timing was a surprise. Amelia admitted a flicker of something almost like grim amusement in her eyes. "But your infidelity was not. I've known for 6 months, Julian. I hired a private investigator the first time you came home, smelling of Chloe Vance's ridiculously strong perfume. I have dates, times, hotel receipts from 3 different cities. I have photographs." She slid a sleek silver tablet across the desk. On the screen was a crystal-clear image of him and Chloe kissing as they entered the Grand Elysian just hours earlier. He flinched as if he'd been burned. This is insane," he stammered, his mind reeling. He defaulted to his usual tactics, aggression and gaslighting. "You think you can play businesswoman? You, Amelia? You arrange flowers. You host dinners. You don't run a multi-billion-dollar company. This is my world, not yours." Amelia leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. For the first time, a sliver of genuine cold fury entered her voice. "Your world, Julian. Let's talk about your world. A world where you lie to your wife, where you use your corporate card to entertain your mistress, and where you bring that mistress to a hotel that you are simultaneously trying to woo as a client. It's not just immoral, it's monumentally stupid. And bad for business." She picked up the Sterling Capital proposal, holding it between her thumb and forefinger, as if it were contaminated. "This proposal is rejected," she stated flatly. "The Elysian Group will not be entrusting its employees' futures to a man of such questionable judgment and character. Arthur," she said, speaking to her lawyer who had been standing silently in the corner of the room, "please see to it that a press release is drafted. Announce my appointment as chairwoman and state that effective immediately the Elysian Hotel Group is severing all professional ties with Sterling Capital, pending a full review of our past dealings." "What? No." Julian shot to his feet. "You can't do that. That will ruin me. Our finances are tied together. You'll be destroying yourself too." "You seem to be confused," Amelia said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You and I have joint finances, but I also have a personal fortune inherited from my father that you have never been aware of. One that now gives me a net worth approximately 20 times greater than yours. I am not destroying myself. I am excising a tumor." She stood up, walking around the desk, to stand directly in front of him. He was taller, broader, but in that moment she towered over him. "You will leave the presidential suite immediately. My security will escort you and Ms. Vance from the premises. Your belongings will be packed and sent to your office. You will find the locks on our home have been changed. My divorce lawyer will be serving you with papers on Monday morning. The grounds will be infidelity, with ample evidence to support it. I will be petitioning to have our prenuptial agreement voided on the basis of fraudulent concealment of assets, though I suspect you'll have little left to fight for by the time this is over." Every word was a perfectly aimed shot, dismantling his life piece by piece. His business, his home, his reputation, all gone in the space of 5 minutes. He stared at her, utterly defeated. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading look. "Amelia, please. We can talk about this. Don't do this. The time for talking was 10 years ago. Julian," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly, not with pity, but with a deep, ancient sadness. "The time for talking was every time you looked through me instead of at me. Every time you dismissed my thoughts, my family, my worth. You didn't just cheat on me, Julian. You erased me. And that is something I will not forgive." She turned away from him, walking towards the vast window overlooking the city. "Arthur, please show Show Sterling out." As Julian was led from the room, a ghost of his former self, he passed the small conference room where Chloe was being detained by another member of security. She saw the look on his face, and her own expression of indignation crumpled into fear. She had bet on a king and had just discovered he was nothing but a court jester. Her golden ticket had just been incinerated. Julian didn't even look at her. He was led past the stunned executives through the opulent lobby where he had strode so confidently just hours before, and out into the harsh light of the afternoon. The doorman who had greeted him with such deference now looked at him with a blank, professional impassivity. The Rolls-Royce and the Aston Martin were gone, likely already being dealt with by Amelia's people. He stood alone on the sidewalk, a king without a kingdom, a man without a home. The city that had been his playground now felt alien and hostile. He had believed he was on top of the world, but he had only ever been a guest in his wife's empire. And checkout time was immediate. The fallout was not a slow burn, it was a detonation. By Monday morning, the business world was buzzing. The press release from the Elysian Group was a masterstroke of corporate messaging. It celebrated the appointment of a dynamic new chairwoman, Amelia Langdon Sterling, the brilliant and private heiress to the company's foundational fortune, and in a short, brutal paragraph, announced the termination of its relationship with Sterling Capital due to a fundamental divergence in corporate ethics and vision. The phrase, fundamental divergence, was just vague enough to be legally safe, but to the sharks on Wall Street, it smelled of blood. Julian's phone, which had been silent with ignored calls from his office, now blew up for a different reason. Investors were calling, demanding to know what had happened. Clients were panicking. The Elysian Pension Fund was a major account, But the reputational damage was infinitely worse. If the Elysian Group, a paragon of stability and class, deemed you ethically unfit for business, who would trust you, Julian holed up in a generic business hotel he'd paid for with his last remaining personal credit card, watched his life's work disintegrate in real time. His partners at Sterling Capital, men he had mentored and bullied in equal measure, convened an emergency meeting without him. By noon, he received an email informing him he had been placed on indefinite leave pending an internal investigation. They were cutting him loose to save the firm. At the same time, Amelia's legal team moved with surgical precision. Acting on the evidence from the private investigator, they were able to get an immediate court order to freeze all joint assets. Julian went to an ATM to withdraw cash and found his accounts were locked. His corporate cards were declined. The river of money that had defined his existence had been dammed at its source. He tried to call Amelia, but the number went straight to a crisp, polite assistant who informed him that Ms. Sterling's schedule is fully committed. He was being handled, managed, outsourced. The divorce papers arrived, delivered by a courier to his hotel lobby. They were thick, detailed, and utterly ruthless. Amelia wasn't just asking for a divorce. She was laying claim to the lion's share of their marital assets, citing the gross misconduct clause in their prenup. Her lawyers were arguing that his affair wasn't just a personal betrayal, but a reckless endangerment of their shared financial stability, a claim made terrifyingly credible by the implosion of his company's reputation. Chloe Vance, meanwhile, had vanished. After being unceremoniously escorted out of the Grand Elysian, she had taken a cab back to her apartment. She tried calling Julian for 2 days, her frantic calls going straight to voicemail. She finally got through on Monday afternoon. "Julian, what is going on?" "My boss called me into his office. He'd heard rumors. They're letting me go. They said I'm a reputational risk." Her voice was shrill with panic. "Join the club," Julian said bitterly. "It's over, Chloe. She's wiped me out." "What do you mean, you? What about us? You made me promises. You said you were going to leave her. You said we had a future." Julian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "A future? I don't even have a present. The money's gone, Chloe. There's nothing left." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and in that silence, Julian could hear the cold calculus of her ambition. He was no longer an asset. He was a liability. "Don't call me again," she said, her voice flat and cold, and hung up. While Julian's world was a raging inferno, Amelia's was a model of controlled, deliberate action. She spent the week in back-to-back meetings at the Grand Elysian, establishing her authority. She met with every department head, from housekeeping to global marketing. She didn't dictate. She listened, absorbing information, her questions always sharp and to the point. The staff who had been nervous about the change in leadership quickly realized she knew the business intimately. She spoke her father's language, the language of guest experience, staff empowerment, and impeccable standards. On Friday, she held an all-hands meeting in the hotel's grand ballroom. She stood on the stage, not behind a podium, but at its edge, creating a direct connection with the hundreds of employees gathered before her. "My father believed that a hotel is not a building," she began, her voice resonating with quiet passion. "It is a team of people dedicated to a simple, powerful idea, making every single person who walks through our doors feel valued and cared for. For a time, I believe we lost sight of that. We started looking at spreadsheets more than we looked at faces. From today, that changes. We will reinvest in our people. We will innovate our services. And we will remember that the soul of the Elysian brand is not in its stock price, but in its service." The applause was thunderous and genuine. They weren't just clapping for a new boss. They were clapping for the return of a philosophy they cherished. Late that night, Amelia was alone in the chairman's office, looking out at the glittering tapestry of the New York skyline. Her lawyer, Arthur Davies, entered quietly. "Everything is proceeding as planned," he said gently. "Sterling's partners have offered him a severance package that is, to put it mildly, insulting. He's a pariah. He has no allies left." Amelia nodded, not taking her eyes off the view. "Good. Are you all right, Amelia?" Arthur asked, his voice full of the paternal concern of a man who had known her since she was a child. "I'm not the broken-hearted wife, if that's what you're asking," she replied, her voice soft. "That woman, she disappeared a long time ago. Every time he condescended to me, every time he insulted my father's memory, a little piece of her died. What's left is what my father built me to be." She paused. "But there's one more thing, Arthur. The real reason Julian could never respect my father." Arthur looked at her, puzzled. "It's not enough to dismantle his present," Amelia said, turning from the window, her eyes hard as diamonds. "I'm going to take his past, too. It's time to show him and the world that his entire self-made empire was built on a lie he stole from my father." Julian Sterling's creation myth was a story he told often at dinner parties, in interviews, and to himself in the mirror. He painted himself as a visionary, a man who early in his career had single-handedly developed a revolutionary financial modeling software. This software, which he named Praxis, could predict market fluctuations with uncanny accuracy. It was the bedrock on which he'd built Sterling Capital, the secret sauce that gave his firm its edge. He claimed he'd coded the original algorithm himself in his cramped post-grad apartment, fueled by cheap coffee and pure genius. It was the story of a self-made man. It was also a complete fabrication. Amelia had always found Julian's story slightly odd. For a man who claimed to be a coding prodigy, he showed a remarkable lack of interest in technology. He could barely operate his own smartphone and left all IT issues to his assistants. The discrepancy had been a small, nagging splinter in the back of her mind for years. After her father, Robert Langdon, had passed away, Amelia had spent months sorting through his estate. In the back of his old, dusty study, in a locked file cabinet he'd called his dream box, she found a collection of meticulously kept notebooks. Her father, the sentimental hotelier, had been a secret polymath. He had filled dozens of journals with ideas, sketches, and theories on everything from architectural design to astonishingly economic modeling. One notebook from nearly 15 years ago was filled with complex algorithms and flowcharts. On the cover, in her father's neat cursive, was a single word: Praxis. As she'd read through it, a cold, sickening dread had washed over her. It was all there, the foundational logic, the predictive models, the entire architecture for a sophisticated financial software. She remembered the timeline. Her father had been excitedly working on this little project, right around the time she had first introduced Julian to her family. Julian, then an ambitious but struggling junior analyst, had spent a weekend at their country home. She remembered him talking to her father in the study for hours. Julian had later dismissed it to her as the fascinating but impractical ramblings of your dear old dad. He hadn't just dismissed it. He had stolen it. He had taken her father's genius, repackaged it as his own, and built his entire career on the intellectual theft. The realization had been the final devastating blow to any lingering affection she had for her husband. His entire persona was a fraud, built on the tomb of her father's stolen dream. This was the ace she had been holding. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was about reclaiming her father's legacy. She convened a meeting with Arthur Davies and a team of the best intellectual property lawyers in the country. They spent a week painstakingly cross-referencing her father's dated, handwritten notes with the core code of the Praxis software, which they were able to obtain through legal discovery in the divorce proceedings. The result was undeniable. Julian hadn't even been particularly creative in his theft. He had digitized Robert Langdon's work almost verbatim. The lawyers called it a slam-dunk case of blatant intellectual property theft. The final confrontation was not in a boardroom or a lawyer's office. Amelia arranged it on her own terms. She had Julian served with a summons to a deposition, but the address was not a law firm. It was her father's old hotel in the countryside, which she had kept and maintained exactly as he had left it. When Julian arrived looking haggard and thin, he was bewildered. The cozy, welcoming lobby of the Langdon Hotel was the last place he expected to see her. A staff member led him not to a meeting room, but to his late father-in-law's study, the scene of the original crime. Amelia was waiting for him, standing by the fireplace. On the large oak desk between them lay the open notebook, its pages filled with her father's elegant script. "Do you recognize this room, Julian?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Of course," he said warily. "What is this, Amelia? Some kind of sentimental ambush?" "It's a history lesson," she replied. She pointed to the notebook. "Do you recognize this?" Julian glanced at the book. His eyes widened, and a flicker of pure panic crossed his face before he masked it with his old arrogance. "It looks like one of your father's old journals. He was always tinkering." "He was more than tinkering," Amelia said, walking slowly towards the desk. "He was creating. He was building the foundation for a revolutionary piece of software, a software he called Praxis." Julian went rigid. "That's ridiculous. I developed Praxis. It's my life's work." "No, Julian," Amelia said, her voice dropping each word laced with contempt. "Your life's work was stealing. You sat in this very room. You listened to a kind, trusting man share his passion with you, and you saw an opportunity. You dismissed him as a fool, and then you took his genius and called it your own. You didn't just build your company on his work, you built your entire identity on it." She picked up a second file from the desk and threw it down in front of him. It was a forensic analysis from the IP lawyers, showing a side-by-side comparison of her father's handwritten algorithms and the initial source code of his software. The correlation was nearly 100%. "Sterling capital is worthless without Praxis," Amelia stated. "And Praxis belongs to the estate of Robert Langdon, which means it belongs to me. I am not just divorcing you, Julian. I am filing a lawsuit for intellectual property theft for 15 years of profits. By the time I am done, you will not have a single dollar to your name that you did not steal from my family." The blood drained from Julian's face. This was the final fatal blow. The affair, the divorce, he could have potentially survived those a disgraced man, but perhaps not a destitute one. But this erased his entire history. It proved he was not a genius, not a visionary, not a self-made man. He was just a common thief. He finally broke. The arrogance, the defiance, it all shattered, leaving behind a hollowed-out man. He slumped into the chair opposite the desk, the same chair he'd sat in 15 years ago, when he'd charmed a brilliant old man out of his masterpiece. "He was so proud of you," Amelia said, her voice now filled with a quiet, sorrowful rage. "He told me after that weekend that Julian is a sharp young man. He has a good heart. You didn't just steal from him. You made a fool of his trust. Of my trust." She looked at the pathetic figure before her, a man stripped of all his lies, and felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a profound sense of closure. She was not just avenging her own betrayal, but her father's. The ghost in the machine had finally been given a voice. The lawsuit was a brutal, swift affair. Faced with the irrefutable evidence of Robert Langdon's notebooks and the forensic analysis, Julian's legal team had no defense. The case never even made it to a full trial. Within weeks, they were forced into a settlement. The terms were devastating for Julian. The ownership of the Praxis software and all its derivatives was transferred to Amelia as the heir of the Langdon estate. Sterling Capital, now a hollow shell without its core asset, was forced into bankruptcy. The settlement required that a massive portion of the firm's liquidated assets be paid to the Langdon estate as restitution for 15 years of stolen profits. Julian Sterling was left with nothing. Less than nothing. He was financially ruined, professionally disgraced, and legally branded a fraud. The story became a cautionary tale on Wall Street, a spectacular fall from grace that was whispered about in hushed, gleeful tones. He disappeared from public life, rumored to be living in a small rented apartment, a ghost haunting the edges of a world he once commanded. Amelia, however, was just beginning. She did not shutter the remains of Sterling Capital. Instead, in a move that stunned the financial world, she used her own capital to acquire the bankrupt firm's assets, its client lists, its infrastructure, its remaining analysts. She then folded it into a new subsidiary of the Elysian Group. She renamed it the Langdon Group, a wealth management firm dedicated to ethical investment and long-term sustainable growth. The Praxis software, once a tool for aggressive market predation, was repurposed. Amelia commissioned a team to build on her father's work, creating new models for socially responsible investing. The Langdon Group became a testament to her father's true genius, not just as an inventor, but as a man who believed that business could and should have a conscience. The Grand Elysian under her leadership flourished. It became more than just a luxury hotel. It became a symbol of a new kind of leadership. Amelia invested heavily in her staff, offering education grants, profit-sharing programs, and wellness benefits that were unheard of in the hospitality industry. Employee morale soared, and service quality already high reached legendary status. The hotel became a case study at Harvard Business School, a model of how prioritizing people could lead to unprecedented success. Amelia was no longer Mrs. Julian Sterling, the quiet wife. She was Amelia Langdon, Chairwoman and CEO, a respected and formidable force in the worlds of hospitality and finance. She was a fixture on most powerful women lists, not for her inherited wealth, but for what she had built with it. One evening, about a year after the dust had settled, she was working late in the chairman's office. Arthur Davies came in to say good night. "Another successful quarter," he said, smiling. "Your father would be so incredibly proud, Amelia." Amelia looked out the window at the city lights, the same view Julian had once thought was his. "I used to think my father's legacy was his hotel," she said thoughtfully. "This single, perfect place he created. But I was wrong. His real legacy wasn't a place. It was a philosophy. It was the idea that you can be successful without sacrificing your soul. Julian never understood that. He thought the world was about taking. My father knew it was about building." She had not just reclaimed her life. She had reclaimed her father's name and his vision, amplifying it on a global scale he had never dreamed of. She had transformed her pain into purpose, her inheritance into a force for good. She was not defined by the man who had wronged her, but by the man who had inspired her. She had lost a husband and a life she thought she knew, but she had found herself. She was the architect of her own empire. Now an empire built not on theft and arrogance, but on dignity, integrity, and the enduring spirit of a sentimental old hotelier. She was finally and completely her father's daughter. and her reign was just beginning. And that's how a woman who was underestimated, ignored and betrayed, turned the tables in the most epic way possible. Amelia's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful reminder that a person's true worth is never defined by how others see them. It's about inner strength, hidden talents, and the quiet, meticulous work that goes on behind the scenes. While Julian was focused on the shallow thrill of an affair, Amelia was playing the long game, honoring her father's legacy and preparing to claim her own. She proved that the most powerful empires aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're built in silence, waiting for the perfect moment to be revealed. If you found this story as satisfying and empowering as I did, please hit that like button to let me know. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next story of justice and vindication. Thank you for listening.